Hi, good morning. Welcome everyone to SoDA Series Live, collaboration between Adobe and SoDA, the Society of Digital Agencies, where we bring you candid and in-depth conversations with creative leaders from all around the world. As some of you who might have tuned in previously, we're running things a little differently today. Normally, I'm just the person who gets to talk to that creative and host the conversation, and I have my partners in this endeavor, Kristen Bell and Tom Beck. They are both on vacation, as we are all wont to do here in the summertime. And so I am flying solo today. But that being said, the goal here today on this stream is still the same: to share with you our community, the many amazing insights and experiences from these design leaders, with hope there'll be something that you can take along with you. And if there's one thing that I've always done in these conversations, is that we are talking to the creative leaders like out there in the industry, really leading the charge on what it means to be a practicing designer today, to run a digital design agency, to work with clients, all over the world in this changing landscape of technology and ideas and communication. So, and this is one of my favorite parts of the week. And let me just introduce myself before I get going too much further. I'm Talon Wadsworth. I am a principal designer here at Adobe. I work on emerging technologies and all the great sort of amazing work going on here at Adobe that will hopefully end up in our tools that help us sort of create the best work possible out there in the world today. That's me, and this is what we're here to do. And now let me introduce you to one of the person we're going to be speaking with today. So today we are fortunate to be speaking with Josh Goldblum, founder and CEO of Bluecadet, an experience design agency that creates experiential and interactive work that sits at the intersection of art, technology, and culture. Lots of great stuff going there. And Josh also is the curator and host of Future Spaces, an online interview series that explores innovation in contemporary experience design. And he and I were already talking well before we joined here today. So Josh, without further ado, welcome. And glad to have you with me today.
All right, Tal, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm a little off my rhythm. This is really, again, I haven't done the full hosting duties in a while. Usually I just let Kristen and Tom take care of all the intros, and then I get to get all the good stuff. So well, cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I always like starting these conversations. I know you've been with us before, so actually this is kind of a repeat. But to give everybody maybe who didn't catch our first conversation, let's kind of just give us a little background on you and your creative journey. How did you, where are you coming from? Where are your influences, and how did you end up, founding Bluecadet and doing all the great work that you've been doing over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was a new media specialist 20 years ago at the Smithsonian American Art Museum. So that was my first legit job, which basically meant I was a Flash developer. Before that, I was actually... I did some director and lingo. If anyone can do a super big
I got you.
Yeah, which was I was creating some really beautiful CD-ROMs. And I did that for a few years, and then I kind of went out on my own. And Bluecadet was my freelance handle. And I was a designer, I was a developer, I was a antagonistic project manager. But I had some success, and I was working in the cultural sector. And then in about 2007, I moved up to, Jesus, wow, long time. I started bringing on some folks, to help on projects. And I was like, oh my gosh, when I bring in people who are specialists or better than me at things, the projects are better. So I moved up to Philadelphia in 2007, hired my first employee who's actually still with me. 17 years later. And, we've just sort of grown from there. So now we are sort of more of a full service. I know we're not full service. What the hell are we? We're a digital product studio where we do things that are both online, but a lot of stuff in physical experiences. So physical space. So we did an interactive play center for the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Medity First, which was actually in the New York Times today. I was very excited to see that.
Nice. Congratulations.
Yeah, super good. It's a great article because it talks a lot about how they use this interactive play space to bring in new audiences and a lot of more local audiences, which is really exciting for us. And then we do a lot of digital product work, big websites and things like that, and some XR stuff, AR stuff kind of in between. There's like around like 40 of us, I think now. Most of us in Philadelphia and New York. We've kind of offices. I moved out to LA about 3 years ago. And I started Future Spaces, which is my kind of, it's like not dissimilar from this. It's a weekly webinar series in the experience design community where I just get to honestly have conversations with people I want to have conversations with. And we do some workshops and fun stuff. So like learning in public.
I am with you there and on a bunch of those sort of references that you made. I wanted to sort of ask something though, because I think this is something I find really fascinating about a lot of sort of creatives out there. How did kind of that early experience in new media and sort of being at the forefront of a really untapped, sort of format, right? Like there weren't a ton of people really operating in those spaces. Like, did you find yourself really what did you take from that experience of essentially just kind of like charting your own path and working in a space that didn't really have a lot of sort of previous art, as it were, or sort of established patterns or paradigms? Like, how do you think that influenced you and your work?
It's funny. So when I was in like high school and college, I was a political cartoonist. So I did political cartoons in high school for our the whatever the weekly there, and then I worked for the Tufts Daily. I was the graphics editor for years, doing political cartoons and illustrations and stuff like that. And I went to my advisor, I was at Tufts, and I was like, I want to be a political cartoonist. And he's like, dude, why the hell would you, it's like a dead medium. It's like a dead medium encased in another dead medium. It's like, and he's like, this is stupid. Like, like what, like you should be looking at doing something that's like a contemporary medium, something where there's like change, there's energy. And I was like, oh, okay. And I was like really into like graphic novels and, things like that. So I was like, oh, I'll be like a comic artist, or I'll do that kind of stuff. And I started doing that. And I'm like, I don't really work well by myself. I have like one of those like ADHD extroversion things where like I literally just need other people around. So, like basically doing stuff that felt like it was collaborative, that it was like and like I could work with other people. And then also something where there was like more, like there was just a frontier. Stuff was constantly changing, and like, and like you could always discover something new. Like that, I just always really got excited by that, and like I still get super excited by that. Like AI, Web3, all those things. Like when I first saw, I also have had an art NFT thing, which I'm actually called Art World, which I'm actually relaunching in September under a new platform. But like, honestly, when I first looked at NFTs, I was like, man, Solidity, which is the coding language for Ethereum. I was like, this just reminds me of Flash and ActionScript. I was like, it's just like an untapped, treasure trove of like new things that have never been done before. And like, cool. And I was like, so to me, that I just get super geeked out about that stuff. And experience design too, is just the total Wild West, so like, I love just being able to do something where I'm like, I don't think anyone's really done this before. You can kind of mash things up in sort of like interesting ways.
Yeah, no, and that totally resonates, and I think tracks with a lot of other creatives that I've spoken with on this series and in other sort of venues, where it really is that drive to communicate or take advantage of these new spaces, and if maybe not to like build something long term, but at least understand them and sort of understand the contours of what's possible, right? And it's really that curiosity driving a lot of creative practices, right?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think my focus in experience design is, I just remember, I grew up in like the Philadelphia suburbs. And like, I just remember like spending a lot of my teenage years just like driving around looking for places to be and places to go. And like, I actually found I did a lot of like, went to a lot of concerts and like post-punk stuff and, and like that kind of like saved my life. But like, I just like, I really, really love designing public spaces, like just like giving people places to be that don't feel completely extractive, that aren't just all about taking your money and taking your time. Like I personally just take a lot of pleasure out of making those things. And also like being in a space that you created is like, so like, and seeing people doing that, I just get a much more direct reward from that than like looking at like the analytics dashboard of a product that we did. Like, oh my God, we had 1 million, monthly active users. So like, it doesn't do anything for me, like emotionally.
Yeah, yeah. You and I were kind of talking about that before we kind of came on, which is this, this willingness in a way to kind of uh obfuscate like the actual like human interactions, the things that actually drive experience and actually push it and sometimes even break it in ways that aren't expected. And how do how do you understand that when you if you're just looking at the numbers, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think one of the things that's really kind of embedded into the Blue Cadet process is a lot of
Yeah.
prototyping and a lot of
Hmm.
building things to scale and experimenting and iterating and testing, because there's all those intangibles that you don't really
Hmm.
get until you're actually interacting with the thing with other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And you can definitely tell when you see an experience and you're like, oh my God, this went completely from like Rhino to the built environment, or like, this is like a
Hmm.
straight Unity export to this thing, and nobody actually tested it with, with users, but also like a
Hmm.
variety of users. Because that's where you pick up on all the subtleties of how people interact and different
Yeah.
types of people with different abilities and perspectives react as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. And let's kind of like work our way just backwards for a second, because I think a lot of people who tune into these conversations, like, and I found this in my own career, like sometimes the opportunity, like you don't even know it's there. Like, I mean, when I was sort of first in college, and I was planning, I knew, I wanted to be an architect, and I knew what an architect was, and it was a very like the template was there in a sense. But then as I got into the field and I started taking other classes and being exposed to more opportunities, that's where design and the opportunities around design like really opened up to me. And even then, even actually now, even like at Adobe, like before I was Adobe, I had no idea that this was even going to be like an option, right, for
Yeah.
me as a creative career. So how did you get into that sort of experiential environmental space? Like, what was your entry point into that? How did you figure out that was even a thing you could do?
Yeah, it's so funny because I got three kids, and my son is 11, and for
Mm.
better or for worse, very much like me. He's been cursed with a brain that's sort of similar to my own. But he's like, oh yeah, when I grow up, I want to do this. I'm like, what the that you want to do when you're older? Like what I do now did not even remotely exist when I was 11. There
Yeah.
was there was like, I mean, there was maybe DARPA had the internet, but like the internet did not exist as we have it today, or
Yeah.
all this, you couldn't predict what was coming down the pipe. So I think what I tell people is like it's just about a matter of just sort of like seeing what's happening now and what's interesting and what makes you curious, and just getting
Hmm.
involved in it.
Yeah.
And the way that I got into doing experience design and being in physical space is like I just was very, very interested in it.
Hmm.
And when when I saw opportunities to do that, I took it. And like in some ways it's there's some like neuroscience to this, but like the brain is like a pattern recognizing, like it
Hmm.
recognizes patterns. So if you put it in your head and you're like, I want to do this thing, or like this is the thing that I'm interested in, as you sort of survey your environment, you start seeing those opportunities. So if so which is really good to have a little bit of a vision. If you're like, yeah, I just love Team Lab, or I love Meow Wolf, and like, or I love XR, whatever, and like I want to be involved in that, and you have that intention, you'll start picking up patterns and seeing opportunities, and then like
Hmm.
it's on you to like capitalize on those things and move towards them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Does that answer your question at
I
all, or did I just totally?
No, totally did. No, totally did. And maybe to sort of drive it a little closer to home. Do
Yeah.
you remember like one of those first moments when you saw that kind of foundational pattern, something that really
Oh
stuck with you that
yeah, yeah, yeah.
inspired you?
So I was doing, so when I went to Tufts in the museum school. So I dropped out of the museum school, which was their art program. I was doing a BA,
Mm.
BFA. I was like 2 credits short of my BFA, which was stupid. I should have just finished. But I was like super anxious and depressed. But I actually had been I picked up a summer job where I was doing director and like, doing like
Hmm.
CD-ROM stuff. Um, and I always loved art. I always loved museums. And I was in New York, like going and trying to like apply to all these like ad agencies for jobs. And a lot of them actually like using director as like the one marketable skill that I had. And after but then most of my portfolio was like drawings, and they were just like, what the hell are you? Because I wasn't trained as a designer. Both my parents are lawyers. I mean, it's like almost like laughable how like, like what I was bringing to these interviews. But afterwards, I would go to museums, and mostly art museums. And then I kind of got bored of art museums, so I went to the American Museum of Natural History. And they had, it was at the planetarium, and along, it's this big sort of round structure, and then there's this like looping stairwell, and they had all these kiosks, and I was like, holy shit, these kiosks are all done in Director. So I went onto monster.com and I looked up museums, which I loved, and I looked up Director, and I found the job for the Smithsonian American Art Museum. And that's how I kind of like got in it. But it was a pattern match, because it was like I knew Director, and I knew I loved museums, and I looked and I found that thing. And like, honestly, there weren't a lot of people vying for the job at that point. So, that's how I got my first in.
Wow. Amazing. I love hearing those kind of foundational stories again, because I think it just illustrates kind of that drive towards, again, I think things like passions in a way are overused, but like that there's a drive towards curiosity, towards creativity, and the application of those skills can have, again, very myriad sort of opportunities, right? Sure. And I think then finding the thing that resonates with you.
Totally. And the other thing that's funny is like at that point I was like so ignorant, because I was like, oh, it's a kiosk in a museum, so it was done by the museum. Like 100% not done by the museum. It was done by it was actually done by this amazing agency, Funny Garbage. That was like one of the OG kind of like agencies. They did great stuff. But like I had no idea agencies existed. I didn't understand agencies existed until I was at the Smithsonian for at least a year. I thought Second Story was just some other dude that I was competing with out in Portland. It was like a full-on studio. So like I was just, feeling like a total jerk and, like a hack, for not being able to produce the same quality as like a full-on agency. And then like later I was like, oh, I was competing against like probably a team of like 7 to 10 people. Like, whatever.
You need a little bit of that ignorance to go along with that curiosity, sometimes just push through those barriers, right, that we put in front of ourselves. So
I mean, there's a lot more information out there now. So like, people can do a bit of better research now than I could do then.
Well, I mean, let's kind of keep following this line then, because I think, again, you mentioned prototyping. And again, I think in a way, again, that's sort of like on that journey, you've landed on a sort of key element like of your practice. But what led you to decide that like, hey, there is this opportunity there, and I'm going to go and found my own, agency to take on this kind of work and to bring on more staff, more specialized staff to execute at this high level of quality? Like, what was that moment, and what did that look like, and how did you know that was the time that you were ready to go out and kind of chart your own path in that space?
Yeah, that's interesting. I love that this is all going back like to the early days. I'm getting nostalgic.
Well, like I said, like there is, like I think this is some of the untold story for a lot of people, because I think getting into your career can feel pretty opaque when you're just starting out, right? And so I think it's not only does it let us go back and maybe talk about Flash a little bit, but I think it allows us to kind of explore like, well, how did one thing lead to another, and then what does it mean to build a practice, right, around a discipline or an industry or a practice, like a practice around your work, So
yeah, it's so funny. So I'm gonna do a quick thing, and I'll go back. But I started Art World 3 years ago in the art NFT space, and I was like, oh, finally, it's like my opportunity to create like a real company. Like so I raised, I raised like all this capital, and we raised like $1.3 million, to like build this company and to do this thing. And we hired all the staff, and I was like, okay, this is finally how I do it. And it was like kind of a dumpster fire in a lot of ways, like our burden was too big. It was so stressful. It was killing me. And so actually, when with Future Spaces, and even as I'm rebooting Art World, I'm doing it much more like I did with Bluecadet, which is like pure bootstrap. Like starting off with like I started Future Spaces with like 5K, and I started Bluecadet with less. I started Bluecadet. It was just me, and I just got enough work that I was like, oh my gosh, I can justify hiring a junior designer that will allow me to focus on, at that point, just development, because I can afford a developer. And then I started getting more opportunities and just like sort of growing very incrementally, you know, and like maybe over that first year, you know, I went from 1 person to 3 people. The second year, maybe 3 people to 7 people. And it was just like, I was constantly hiring for the thing that I sucked at the most, you know? And, you know, and it allowed me. And then like, you know, part of it was like, I was 30 when I started the agency. So like, I didn't have 3 kids. You know, I didn't like, I had my girlfriend, you know, who's like now my wife, you know, but like, you know, it was like I could skip a paycheck, you know, I could run real lean. Like I did not pay myself very much. But I got to like put a lot of that back, you know, and I got to take projects where like I executed those projects at a level that was way more than the budget required. But then we started winning awards. We won an Emmy Award in 2009. And that really put us on the map. And like, I can tell you that like, I did a site that Bluecadet now would probably price it like 300K. And I did like 2 projects for 30K. You know, that was my budget back then. But like that put us on the map. And that's like what allowed us to kind of like do it. And, you know, at various points we took risks where it's like, you know, I want to be doing architecture. I hired an architect way ahead of having all the work ready for that person. But then I just scrambled and filled it in, made it happen. Or you hire people who are a little bit kind of like multi-talented, you know, because they can do this, but you also know secretly they can do that. So you can move a little bit into getting that kind of work. And then sometimes you take big risks, you know, opening up the New York office was a big risk. I hired 3 people, you know, who were very, very high level because I knew I needed that to level up to get to that next thing. So but it's but again, man, very bootstrappy, iterative, you know where the horizon, like I kind of talk about sailing. It's like, I'm actually a terrible sailor. I'm almost a little terrified of the water, but like I use the analogy, which is like when you're sailing, you know, kind of where you're going, but you can't go there directly. You just have to know your next few tacks and you're constantly seeing where the wind is shifting. So like, that's how I sort of operate, which is like, I kind of have a sense of where I want to go and what I want to do, but like, really it's knowing how to execute those next few tacks.
And and that, I mean, and of course, then you mentioned that word iterative, right? And that those next few tacks, as we're using our sort of, you know, analogy here, is really built on, you know, the experience, you know, like as you go, right? In an iterative way, you're saying what went well on that thing, what didn't go well, what do we want to do next? How do we want to approach the next thing?
Totally.
Yeah. So talk about that in person. So I think it kind of leads us to kind of this like ethos of prototyping as a key element of your practice there at Bluecadet. And talk about how you've established that, you know, with your team, and even how you kind of work with your clients, because like you said, like these are complex choreographed interactions, you know, happening in a physical space that can have a lot of variables, can have a lot of different sensory and spatial problems to solve. So talk about, you know, prototyping in your practice and how that kind of plays out, you know, today.
Yeah, so I'm going to give a shout out to Brett Renfer, who is the Bluecadet ECD in the New York office, who actually just recently went over to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He worked on the Met AD First project and went over to the Met, and we're very, very happy for him, and like it was awesome. But you know, he brought in, you know, we hired him. You know, he was doing a lot of body storming. You know, he had been over at Rockwell Labs, and he was at Collins after that, and he taught over at Parsons. And a lot of what he practiced was body storming, which was literally building things at 1-to-1 scale, cardboard, projection, prototyping, and iterating, and really working in close collaboration between design and technology. So, bringing designers and technologists into the same conversation and testing and iterating and playing and building out the thing from there. Because, frankly, if you're doing something on a screen, like you can get away sometimes with some Figma prototypes or whatever. And, some animatics, like you can do that's because those are like usually one person interactions. If you're trying to optimize around, how to get groups of people to do something, well, then you're really creating a game. And you can't test a game without having players, and it's like you're never gonna make a multiplayer game and be like, yeah, okay, now put it out in the world, it's gonna be great. Like you gotta test it with players, you gotta see how people interact with it. And so that's become like a really big part of our, our practice at Bluecadet. And like, honestly, it's a lot of fun too, because, a lot of times things that you think are going to be brilliant, and they look awesome, when you're sketching them, or they look, you put them in the world and you're like, it doesn't work, but then you can, do these like little iterations and tweaks and pivots, and you're like, and suddenly you find something that's like, you would never have concepted on paper, that just like really has that thing to it, that like, a little bit of magic.
Yeah, no, and I thanks for sort of digging into that. Again, the prototyping is something that I believe in. It's sort of been a huge part of my own practice, and I think you're right. Like when we do sort of, we can, things on the computer screen, things, even in a sketchbook can almost be too clean, right? And not until that we've sort of put them out there to gather that feedback, to gather that real world experience where, it's hard for us to even identify, like where the opportunities are and where the pitfalls are,
totally.
in the project.
Yeah. And look, I mean, and part of it is like, I really believe that, that like, this is all like what we do is a team sport, and it's not really about like one idea. Like in some ways, I've had this conversation with a lot of SoDA agency owners, which is like, I kind of think agencies are just like bands, it's like a gathering of different skills, and like you need all of them kind of like together to make the right sound, and it's like, you might have your sort of principal songwriter, but like you really need everyone to like to create the thing. So, what prototyping also does is it takes a lot of the ego out of it, because you're not going to sit there and produce this beautiful, finely honed thing that someone else is going to execute. You're kind of jamming on it, and you like allow it to take the form that it needs to take.
Yeah. It's fascinating you mentioned band. I was actually listening to a podcast this morning called One Song. If you all haven't heard it, it's great. Two artists break down tracks from bands, and today the episode was Smashing Pumpkins. And they were talking about like the influence that Jimmy Chamberlain had on the song, like how the song ended up on the album, in working with Billy Corgan. He's got the kind of creative vision for that. But it was Jimmy Chamberlain's skill as a drummer that added this whole new layer, to those songs. And then that was then something that, Corgan then took and built upon, right? The sort of small little innovative steps that, that Jimmy Chamberlain would add would lead to the next sort of step, for Billy and his work. And I've always found that internally as well. Like, the collaborations I've had with the really smart engineers that I partner with over time here on the different various projects is like, when that dialogue is happening, and you're putting things out there, and you're reducing some of that ego, and you're building up that trust, like it's a 1 + 1 = 3 equation, right? It's not a strictly sort of like by the step-by-step iterative or additive. It's no, we're gonna, like, us pushing each other and in dialogue with each other is going to take this to kind of a new level that we couldn't have achieved separately.
Yeah, and while we're on the music analogy, I'm going to give a shout out to Rick Rubin and the book that he wrote, The Creative Act. Listen, Audible is amazing because he reads it and he's got an amazing voice. I hope, if I could grow that beard, that would be my look. Maybe someday I can pull that off.
I'll get there. I used to.
Yeah. But Rick Rubin's fun because his whole thing is just being the person on the outside that has taste. And has like a really he can't do any he doesn't have any practical skills in like some ways, but like I would say like these days like my contribution is so Rick Rubin-y, it's like just the guy that like comes in there and be like works with the band and be like, that just doesn't sound right, or like we do and but again it's like the chemist like that. I think in some ways those are like the better analogies for like the kind of creative practice work that we do.
Yeah, 100%. And I neglected to say something at the top of our conversation, which is hello to everyone in the LinkedIn chat. I am so sorry I didn't acknowledge you. That is my fault, as I was like trying to handle all the sort of things, the information, the sort of logistics this morning. But hello everyone. Please feel free, as some of you are already, to enter some questions into the chat. They'll come right in here to Josh and I, and of course, we're definitely going to have some more time here at the end to take them, but I always like to try and weave them in as we go because they become kind of, they're relevant to the conversation we're having. So I've got two questions here, and I'm sorry I didn't get the names of who they're from. So, but the first question was, what steps would you recommend for an experienced interaction designer transitioning into doing more physical, environmental, interactive work? What does that skill
Yeah.
transfer look like? What kind of things would you recommend for someone who'd be interested in getting into that field?
I think like anything, it's sort of it's just like just having a good sense of who's out there and who's doing good work. And like it's a conversation. So, oh, look at that. That's a cool little feature.
Look at that. That's new.
I love it. So like I'm going to give a self plug for featurespaces.com. I do all these talks with people who are in experience design, like including, people like, David Schwartz from Hush, who's a SoDA member. And, a lot of these are just like my friends, but we have people from Team Lab. We've had people from Museum Ice Cream, from Camp. We've had people from Disney Imagineering. I do it every week. There's some really fun ones. But the idea is like really just like know who's out there and who's doing work and have like an opinion about it. Cause like so much of it's like, I'm going to keep going back to the band thing, but it's like, if you want to like, it's like, you just got to listen to a lot of music and know what out there that inspires you, and also listen to enough and see enough and have enough of a critical perspective on it where you can be like, oh, this is where I can contribute. Because again, I think it goes back to that pattern recognition, which is like, if you know who's out there and you know what they're doing, and you start like getting involved and entering into the conversations and you know what you do, then like, you'll see that like little match where you're like, oh crap, these guys need a Python developer. I know Python. Oh, like it sounds like they need a they need a designer. I'm just going to like get in. I'm just going to make my services available. And like, sometimes you come and like, honestly, sometimes you come in cheap. You come in free. The first step is not where you make your money, but like, you get your foot in the door. Or you just like, it's like, look, if you, again, if you can't join a band, start a band, like find a project, find something that you're excited about. Just do some prototypes, just get, like if you work well alone, create a project. If you work well in groups, find some people and make something, because like that's, that's the way to go. The way that I wouldn't go is like, stay in the abstract and look for that perfect opportunity and apply to 1,000 jobs. Snipe. I'm like much more of like a sniper, go after find the pattern, go after the thing.
Yeah, totally. And this new feature, look, it's working. And that question was from Kate. So Kate,
oh yes,
thank you
Kate.
for
the
question
if that doesn't
there.
answer your question, just like DM me on LinkedIn and I'll monologue to some other thing.
Nice. No, thanks for answering that one. You touched on it. We've talked about it a little bit, but let's transition over to Future Spaces and talk about kind of where that came from. How did you come to, speaking of starting, creating your own opportunities, what led to the creation of Future Spaces?
It's really interesting. I mean, like so many things, honestly, the pandemic, because I've been in this space for a long time. So I have like a lot of friends in this space, and like, SoDA, I have a lot of people that I like absolutely like, like love and appreciate. And part of it was like, honestly, I was just having conversations with a lot of friends, and we were a lot of experienced designers who were like, what the hell are we going to do? Like the world's closed. And we're just having like these really great conversations. And, I was like, man, and then like we would get like really weirdly philosophical. And we're like, oh man, I think some people would really benefit from this. And then also sometimes what would happen is like, I would talk to a friend and they'd be talking about like this project that they did. And I'm like, man, I kind of want to see their deck. I want to see a presentation. I want to see what they're doing. But I'm like, I feel really weird asking a friend to give me a slideshow. So I'm like, I was like, well, what happens if I created a framework where I could invite a lot of us together, like open it up, and then like we can all look at this thing together and have a conversation. And then like it became a vibe, like it started off and it was like 20, 30 people showing up. And then, we had one where we had 600 RSVPs, like 300 attendees, and it's like, and there's this really exciting cross-pollination happening, and for me, like, I love it just because like, I love being able to have conversations with people that I think are really interesting. I started doing workshops too, because like there's just things I want to learn. Where I'm like, I kind of want to know how Stable Diffusion works. I want to know how Comfy UI works. So I'll create a workshop and I get to attend for free. You know, so it's like really honestly just a learning in public kind of thing.
I love that. No, you and I didn't share a real affinity and love for just being able to sort of dig into the weeds a little bit, and I think that's something that it was resonating with me. I think even before we started the SoDA series live, which was started during the pandemic, I think for very similar reasons, which is, where can we have that forum to have these kind of open conversations, and instead of it being, overly polished or again sort of focused on just the highlights or the hits, right? But really like, what are the ups and downs of this whole thing? Why are we doing this? What are the things that are impacting the way that we want to work, or the opportunities that are being presented to us? So I really appreciate the work that you've done with Future Spaces.
Can I go off on another tangent, which I think maybe
do it. That's why we're here.
Okay. Yeah. So if you go and look up Future Spaces on Spotify, you will find 2 episodes of a podcast that I did way back when. I'm actually going to be launching some new stuff like in podcast form, but they're like super, super well produced. They're like beautifully done. Okay. Those 2 episodes cost me like $15K to produce, and it was and took forever. And like, they're beautiful. They're well produced. They're super polished, like terrible idea. And it's like, I hated doing it. I was like just doing, it was so arduous to like do that kind of work, and like, cause I had these amazing conversations, and then I was spending a month with an editor tuning and polishing. And it just was not the right fit for me. And like, the thing at Future Spaces is like, it's the right fit for me. Cause like I just love doing it. It's easy for me to do. It's pretty unpolished. I don't feel a need to make it polished. And like, it's just, it's like, again, going back to the band thing. It's like, if your sound's a little like loose and sloppy, like don't join the orchestra, like find the right medium to express yourself. Like, I tried forever to write long form blog posts, or like, do write things that were like really polished and this or that, or like create a Twitter persona, and I'm just like, oh my God, I hate it. So I think part of it was just finding the outlet that just felt natural for like the way that I support myself.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing that you really focus on in those conversations, which maybe I can kind of turn the question back onto you, like what are you tracking through those conversations in terms of the innovations or the ways in which the industry is going, right? Again, I said this kind of at the top, but one of the things I love about talking with yourself and other SoDA members is that, in building a practice and having a business kind of built around that practice, like there is this pressure to constantly evolve in a way. Like, not only do you have that natural curiosity, which you and I were talking about, but like, you want to keep the doors open, right? So you really are out there really tracking the trends and the things that are shaping the work that you're doing now and will hopefully be doing in a year to 3 years to 5 years. So what are some of the highlights? What are some of the things that you've been thinking about recently in terms of the like how the industry is changing, or how our work as creatives are changing?
Yeah, so interesting. It's funny because as you say that, like I tend to be like a kind of optimistic person. But like all optimism comes from a bedrock of like, having like sort of depressive depths.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a point for another conversation. I think one of the things that's really interesting is like, we're at a point of real disruption right now. And like, in some ways it reminds me a lot of like that inflection point that happened, like when Flash was dying and mobile was coming up, like the iPhone showed up in 2007, Flash was not able to like, get on that device because Steve Jobs wanted to kill it, and like everything. And you're like, oh my God, I'm like, I could be out of a job. This thing that I love and that I worked on, like, sucks. Like, do I have to learn how to do like Drupal? Is like responsive design like my new thing? And there was like a lot of people that was like very dark night of the soul, like, what are you going to do? And like, I kind of like wrote it out and pivoted and did all that stuff, and like, ended up where I am. And I see the stuff now with like AI and all of this, like, technology change and shift. And like, there's, things are going to change, But like, I think part of it is you have to sort of believe that like the role of a designer is to solve problems, you know, not to like be amazing at the, like at Figma or like other particular tool. And if I take any comfort is that there's like just a ton of problems to be solved. I mean, I think actually one of the things you can do is just like look at like, we had this conversation before that we were like nowhere close to utopia, and like probably a little further from dystopia than some people think as well. And so if you go out in the world, you know, and you just sort of see things that are just like not quite good enough, you know, like, and like, honestly, like I go to a museum and like, I love it, but I'm constantly agitated because I'm constantly seeing where things are not good enough. And like great ideas and great companies come from being slightly agitated. I mean, like Uber came from the fact that like Travis Kalanick was stuck somewhere and couldn't get a cab. And it was like, I have a phone. It has geolocation on it. I can't get anyone to find me. You know, Airbnb in a lot of ways started out with like people not being able to find a hotel room that matched their needs. So it's like, as a designer, just like look at the world. It's like totally messed up, you know, and if you go into the world and see it's totally messed up, there's so many problems to fix. And like, that's where we need designers and like use all the tools, you know, because these tools are great at solving problems. So like, don't bitch that like, okay, now suddenly like it's, you know, it's going to automate what took me 6 hours in Figma to an hour. So I can only bill an hour. It's like, okay, how do I orient to solving problems that like actually matter to me, my community, in the world?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% sort of echo that sentiment. And I think there was a moment that in kind of my early, like it was like early in my time at Adobe where I think, again, you know, being in the Bay Area, you can be pretty insulated. You know, you're in this bubble. And so everybody's working in the same way and interested in the same things and interested in solving the same problems and generally the same-ish way, right? There are iterative steps and all that. And then I ran a forum where we invited designers really from all over the country. And here comes this talented guy from the Midwest, and he was doing experience design, UI design for John Deere tractors.
John Deere does great stuff. Yeah.
They do great stuff. And like, that's like the food chain is a massive problem. And here's a creative on the ground seizing an opportunity. I mean, I'm sure that's probably as we all take these meandering paths, but he found himself, I think, really injecting into our conversation. Like he became this example of what you're speaking to, which is like there are a lot of problems in the world. Totally. And if we are very insulated in this little designer bubble about like what is design good at, what are the tools that we use, and how do we apply them? Like there's only like we can only do that for so long before we're going to have to branch out. We're going to have to look for those opportunities like as they come along, because this is not static. We're not static people, right? Like we're not static culture, you know, like things will continue to evolve and opportunities. I'm with you. I'm an optimist because I've come from some of those dark places, like, you know, but the change is there and their opportunities are there if we are out there looking for them.
Totally. And, you know, I think, you know, there's a difference between being cynical and being critical. I think a lot of people are cynical. They're like, oh my gosh, you know, like, you know, they read something about something that they care about that like really upsets them. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, like we're losing coral reefs, you know, and and they're cynical and they're like, oh my God, and they doom spiral, which like, by the way, you know, if I don't sleep enough or travel too much, like right there with you, to it. Spiral. I'm right in there. But I think there's another thing about being critical, which is you look at, you know, which is being able to like look at something, see that there's a problem, and then be able to deconstruct it in a way to see if you can contribute in some way. I mean, look, like maybe it's working with them and contributing your talents. Maybe it's giving money. Maybe it's giving attention, like whatever those things are. But like, I think, you know, designers often like they have the faculty to be critical. And like, I think that's really valuable to the world. And, you know, the other thing too, is like, you know, Scott Galloway, you know, he has this whole thing where he's like, you know, you should not, you know, you should like make money, you know, don't worry, don't find your passions. But like, I think what's actually interesting is in design and particularly in client services, like you actually have the opportunity to do a little bit of both, which is that like, you can find like, cause like Bluecadet at any time, you know, we're gonna have like 20, 30 projects in production, you know, and like some of them, like, you know, like, I mean, honestly, most of them are pretty pretty like aligned with what we do. Um,
Mhm.
but like some, but like, you know, they have to make money. Like we, you know, like we all have kids, we make a living, you know, like, you know, like I live in friggin' Santa Monica. It's not the cheapest place in the world to live, believe me. But it's like, but you know, you can find, you know, a balance of projects, you know, things that really push you technically and like really allow you to explore your craft, things that like feel really aligned with things, you know, where you want to contribute in the world, and things where you're like, look, I'm doing a service and I'm being fairly compensated.
Mhm.
And I think, you know, designers, you know, they can design in the world, but they can also design and, you know, design their queue, you know, design what they're working on,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yeah.
finding that balance.
Yeah, you know, that's, I think it's a really interesting point. I think that there is this element of I don't know how to phrase it, but that, yeah, trying to like sort of find your passion, right? Was probably fine for its time, but it can be sort of overused. But you know, again, I sense kind of a kindred sort of approach in the two of us, where it really is where, you know, there's the craftsmen, the craftspeople, you know, designers out there in the world, like there's a way that we like to solve problems, and that's the way that we evaluate the world, and that's the way that we sort of, you know, move through it and have a critical eye turned towards it. And if you want to call that a passion, so be it.
Yeah.
But I think what you and I are talking about here is that there are opportunities for you to apply those skills that you have in the ways in which you see the world, right? And there's ways
Yeah.
to solve, there's ways to find something to make money that helps you solve the problems the way that you want to solve those problems, you
Yeah.
know, or
And
the things that you're best suited to do.
yeah, and totally. And, you know, I think honestly, if I were to say anything, it's just like developing a critical faculty.
Hmm.
Because like, honestly, you know, I've worked with clients that have amazing causes that were like not great partners. Like, and they made
Yeah.
me really miserable. You
Yeah.
know, and like we'll never do work that like doesn't comport with our sort of like morals or like our values. But like, you know, we'll do work that's like, okay, you know, it's like a higher ed website and the clients are lovely people and we're happy to support them. You know, and we're fairly compensated. And, you know, and like often, like I think passion is not the right word. I sometimes think about it as like things that are intrinsically and extrinsically motivating. You know,
Hmm.
sometimes you're intrinsically motivated because the work is meaningful.
Hmm.
And like, or like the connection with the client is really meaningful. And then sometimes you're extrinsically motivated by, you know, awards and money and stuff like that. But like those things are
Sure.
also totally fine because like
Yeah.
I personally like I enjoy a good restaurant. And like, if not for those extrinsic motivations, I'm not going to them. Like, I like to travel, like, you know, like my children, you
Hmm.
know, like if I like a lot of this stuff that comes in more extrinsically, feeds the other things as well.
No, really well said. Well, what, you know, you mentioned this, you know, future spaces also as a way to sort of keep learning, you know, yourself
Totally.
with these kind of workshop formats. What are some things you've been investigating, or things that you have on the horizon that you want to learn, that you want to integrate in some way, you know, into your
Yeah.
practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's fun about future spaces is it's like there's that parable of the blind men and the elephant, you know, which is like there's all these blind men around this elephant. They're all feeling different parts of it. And
Hmm.
based on what they feel, they think they have a sense of the elephant, but like really they only have like I was like, dude, you're holding a trunk,
Yeah.
you're holding the leg, and you're making like massive assumptions about the whole. So
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
I kind of see future spaces as my way to kind of like circle the elephant a little bit and like just be like, what are you
Hmm.
doing over there? You know, like in retail,
Yeah.
and you know, like, and just like, you know, it's so funny. I was actually very critical of the Museum of Ice Cream. But I had this guy, Dominic, who's a senior designer over Figure Eight that does Museum of Ice Cream on
Yeah.
future spaces. And he was talking about how they design for emotion. And how they really think about in the visitor journey mapping certain emotions, and you know, and I'm like, man, that's just a beautiful, beautiful way of thinking about it. And like, I'll take that back to my museums, you know, I'll take that, you know,
Yeah.
and I'll take that to my clients and be like, yeah, you know, like we never thought of that. You know, if I'm working on a museum, you know, experience, I'm like, yeah, like let's think about mapping it for emotion. Camp, man, that was a Eureka camp. I mean, that guy is brilliant. You know, and so much of what they do, you know, in scenography and, you know, and placemaking, and even the speed at which they produce those projects, is like incredibly inspiring. And, you know, and then, you know, you got something like Team Lab where I'm just like, half the time I
Yeah.
was just swimming, but I was like, oh my God, this is the sort of brain it takes to create those experiences, you know? So like, it's just really cool for me. And I think it's
Yeah.
like, you know, maybe I'm just like going to cycle back to like the music analogy, which is just like, it's just like listening to a lot of, you know, cause you can just, I just want to listen to stuff that's not my own, you know, or like doesn't come from my band.
Hmm.
And, you know, and I'm
Yeah.
like, oh man, I'll learn some things. And then maybe you collaborate, you know, maybe, you know, you know, you were like, oh shoot, you know, like honestly, you could use a little bit of what we do.
Yeah.
It's one of those things,
Yeah.
you know, because I know
For
what Bluecadet
sure.
does real well.
Well, I love how I think the few sort of anecdotes you shared there were really illustrative of, not getting kind of too locked in, kind of inside your head, as we all can do, and sort of keeping that sort of spirit of curiosity and keeping that critical eye kind of turned both on yourself and on the world around you. And it's like being open. I mean, I love that the example that you shared of talking with the person at the Museum of Ice Cream, because I think, from the outside that can feel very overplayed, right? Like here it is
Yes.
everywhere, and it's just like dominating the conversation. But you stayed open and you invited someone to share, like, where did that come from? How what are you considering as you're putting that together? And there's a reason why it resonates, and it's not, staying open to, other interpretations or other approaches. I think can really lead you right to that next kind of, moment of inspiration, or that new thing that you can add into your own, bring, into your own practice to expand what you're capable of,
Yeah. I mean, look, I think,
yeah.
you know, part of it is like that, you know, scarcity versus abundance mindset, you know,
Hmm.
and, you know, scarcity, if you feel like you don't have enough resources, you know, if you don't feel like there's enough work out there, if you don't think that there's a place for your talents, if you think that you have to be protective over your, you know, your piece of the pie, you know, you get very constricted, you know, and like,
Hmm.
and you know, and you feel like everyone's an enemy, you know, somebody else wins an award and you get pissed off. Someone puts out a project and you're cynical, you only see what's wrong with it, you know, and where you would
Yeah.
have done better, and you get very small. And like
Hmm.
putting it out there, like, you know, I've been that way. I get that way. And
Yeah.
like, you know, I'm a
Yeah.
competitive dude. You know, I want to do the best work. I like to win. You know, I want to be, but like, you know, it takes a lot, you know, to be like, no, 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 like the abundance mindset, which is like, you're going to grow the pie. You're going to just assume that you can create more opportunities in the world, that there's like
Yeah.
that you can, if you can be more expansive, then it's like, look, then that little slice grows with it, you know? You
Yeah.
don't have to be as protective. So like, I really try to cultivate that sort of abundance mindset, you know, and like, look, and if you don't think there's like enough, you know, and like, it's funny because I've, you know, there's a book called Abundance by Peter Diamandis. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. And like, there's part of me that like feels it's a little bit, dangerous, and that it, like, I don't know if I believe in abundant resources, you know, like I think
Yeah. Yeah.
late stage capitalism has definitely pushed our resources, but I think there's abundant
Hmm.
problems. I think there's
Yeah.
abundant things that where, you know, smart, interested, critically minded people can contribute themselves to solving problems, you know, and then when we get to utopia, we can solve for that. But like, you know, like right now, if you're, you know, there are abundant problems, so take comfort.
Yeah. No, I mean, that is such a nice note. Again, I want to leave the door open here to anyone who might have a comment there in LinkedIn.
Oh yeah,
But
sorry.
I think that was such a sort of elegant sort of note to wrap on. So again, I don't think I could end it any better than that. So
There's that, yeah, telling them. And you know, if people want have more questions or whatever, just hit me up on LinkedIn. That's like the only social platform that I'm like actually very active on, unless you want to see pictures of my children on Instagram. Or just like come out to Future Spaces, because I'm there hosting them. You know, I'd love to have more people in the Adobe community. You know, join us there. You know, it's a vibe. And I'm very open to bringing, you know, I'm open to learning what people are doing that's cool and interesting, and also very happy to help, you know, younger professionals get into this world.
well, thank you for being so generous with your time and your energy. And I know I will definitely be tuning in to future spaces.
You're very welcome
And
there.
Josh, it was such a pleasure to speak with you again. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, Sam. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks,
All
guys.
right.
And thank
Hey,
you,
everyone.
everyone who joined us in LinkedIn chat. We will be back next month as well. I encourage you all. Oh, we're back. Thank you, Kendall. I also want to remind everyone we have started to take some of our past episodes and also our most recent episodes and turn them into a podcast. So go to any your preferred podcast platform, and you will find SoDA Series Live there. You can hear some of our great conversations from our archive, as well as this episode here today with Josh will be available in 2 weeks. So we are releasing 2 episodes every month. Would love your support there. Please go and subscribe and leave us a review if you really like what we're doing there. And you can also, of course, catch this episode archived on the Creative Cloud LinkedIn channel. And we appreciate all of you joining us today. So thank you so much, and we'll catch you next month.